Hello, my name's Phil, and I'm a fake.
My name's Phil, and I'm a failure. And I'm a failure because I failed in what I originally wanted to become in life. And that was the dream of millions of kids around the world. And that was to be a professional sports person. And in particular, a professional footballer. And I got close, really close, to be truthfully honest with you. Really close. At the age of 12, I got scouted by my local professional team and got signed on a schoolboy contract. And at the age of 17, it got extended to a 2-year full-time apprenticeship. So day in, day out, I travelled in and out of the local city to train, to try and become one of these idols we now look on TV. At the end of it, after 2 years of constant training, constant trials and commitment, D-Day arrived, decision day, where you got summoned to the first team manager's office. Your fate was in his hands now. I nervously walked towards the door and gave it a tap. Enter. I then realised I'd never been in his office before. It was forbidden territory. And as I opened it, it seemed like he sat a million miles away on this massive leather chair. It was like something from The Sopranos, to be truthfully honest with you. Probably just missing the cigar smoke. He called me forward, and I sat in his chair in front of his desk. And he muttered the words I will never forget. "Sorry, son, we'll have to let you go." I sat there totally heartbroken, obviously. And he kept talking to me, but I didn't hear a sound. His lips were moving. I then got his attention as I stood up and walked out of his office. And as I left to his door to start the rest of my life, totally heartbroken, I had a decision to make. Did I go left or right?
So the health and safety team can relax now. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and it's for the people that have just tried to catch the ball or did catch a ball. The first one is, when did you consciously decide to catch that ball? And the second part of that question is, were you aware of that conscious decision? Now, if you didn't get a chance to catch a ball, perhaps you'd like to have a little go at this multiplication here. Today we're going to explore two types of thought process, a System 1 fast thought process of the ball catchers and a System 2 slow thought process of the guys that are doing the multiplication. Now these experiences are entirely different. The fast thought process of the ball catchers was probably away from their conscious awareness. Had I not suggested them to review that decision, they wouldn't have been even aware that they made the decision. Now the slow thought process of those that are doing the multiplication is entirely different. A deliberate and conscious effort to try and solve this puzzle behind me. Certain things are going to start happening to those mathematicians as you try and work this out. Neurologically, you're going to have to access the cognitive program for multiplication, which you would have learned at school. You're also going to go through various physiological changes. Your body temperature will rise. You may even squirm around in your seat under the pressure of trying to solve it whilst I'm talking in the background. Your pupils may dilate, and you may even start to mildly sweat. However, interestingly, once you've accessed the correct answer, or your perception of the correct answer, your body will immediately turn to homeostasis, return to how it originally was. And the correct answer is 432. 432?
Now, we have a great passion for reducing accidents and incidents in dangerous industries. And what that is part of that is the decision-making and the subsequent consequence of that. And what we realise is that in all of these incidents we look into, there's the presence of the abnormal and the absence of the normal.
I once heard an interesting story about a colonel in the army, a colonel with great brevity. And when he received new officers at his regiment, he would bring them up to his office for what's known as a one-way conversation. And anyone that's been in the military will probably be chuckling now, because a one-way conversation is never really a good thing to get, especially one that lasts less than 10 seconds. So as these nervous young officers would wait outside his office, he would shout them in one by one. They'd march up to his desk, come to attention, and salute promptly. And he'd say to them, "You only need to know 3 things to work for me effectively. The first thing is, correct decision. Well done. Happy with that. The second thing is, wrong decision. unlucky, learn from it. The last thing, which is the most important, indecision, unacceptable to me. And he'd turn them around promptly out of the office. Now, interesting as that theory is on decision making, we have a different philosophy. We look at decisions as a cause and effect equation. We don't judge them as good or bad. We just look at the decision in earnest and the consequence of that decision. The Nobel Prize winner and fellow TED presenter Daniel Kahneman, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, alludes to these decision-making processes. System 1, fast thought, and System 2, slow thought. Now, System 1, the fast thought process, it's away from your conscious awareness. It allows you to do simple multiplications like 2 times 2, and then finish it off. And it also uses something that we call heuristics, or rules of thumb. And when I threw the balls originally, I invited you to use something called a gaze heuristic. Now, the gaze heuristic works by you seeing the ball, making an unconscious decision that there's a likelihood that I'm going to throw it to you. You're then going to see the speed of the ball, work out the trajectory, the high point of the ball, which is really important, the deceleration, and then hopefully where the ball's going to land and catch it effectively. And when you consider all of these calculations of a professional cricketer that catches a ball from high above his shoulder whilst running, it's an amazing feat of the unconscious mind. Now, the slow thought process of System 2 is entirely different. It's deliberate and conscious. You consciously have to access cognitive programs for complex multiplications. It also allows you to examine complex arguments and start to prepare logical responses to the arguments. Interestingly as well, I suppose it would allow you to look objectively at local superstition, decide it insane, but then still say hello to the fairies when you go to the airport. But both of these systems require information to make the decisions. Information is the breakfast of decision-making process. And we experience the world around us through our 5 senses. We experience it through sight, through hear, touch and feel, smell and taste. Auditory, visually, kinesthetically, olfactory and gustatory senses. However, if modern science is to be believed, we can only process 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2 at the conscious level. So we have to do something with this information. So when it enters our neurology, we begin to delete, distort, generalize. We start to filter information out through a process of meta-programs, memories, language. And what we're left with at the end is this internal representation of the world. And it's with this internal representation, our model of the world, that we start to make our decisions. It's with this decision process you would have decided to come to TED however many weeks ago. You then would have had to decide to buy your tickets, which was probably harder than you expected if the internet's to be believed. You'd have decided you needed to organize babysitters, a way to get here, who you're coming with, where you're sitting, all of these decisions at a conscious level. Or is it at a conscious level? Groundbreaking research from Professor John Dylan Haynes at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, they have discovered some incredible facts about how we make free choice. Participants were invited to take part in an experiment of free choice. They could either press a button with their right hand or a button with their left hand. They could choose the frequency, they could choose if they didn't press a button, they could choose if they pressed buttons at the same time. The only stipulation for the validity of the experiment was that as soon as they knew which hand to press at a conscious level, they had to hit the button straight away. Now, with complex computer programs, micro patterns of brain activities were located at the frontopolar cortex in the brain, and these scientists were able to accurately predict 7 seconds before the participants pressed the button, which button they were going to press. For us, working in an industry, in an environment where we're trying to prevent the next Deepwater Horizon or the next Challenger space shuttle, this scientific evidence that we've known for thousands of years that we do make decisions at a subconscious and a gut feeling level.
Now, gut feeling is really an interesting topic, isn't it? It's something that's been bandied around for years and whether we should listen to the sixth sense or not. But I'd just like to share a couple of stories with you, and in particular about Milky Quail, who's there depicted in a fantastic piece of artwork from an Isle of Man artist by Kit Nelson, who was a good friend of ours. Now, when we were researching for this talk, we were lucky enough to get hold of Milky and have a conversation with him and start firing a few questions. And he said one of the things he always remembers about one of his biggest sort of memories of racing was one day when he was due to be out qualifying for the Manx Grand Prix, is that he woke up that morning in his bed and didn't want to race. It was the first and only time it happened in his career. Something was telling him not to go. He didn't want to go, and he listened to it, and he didn't race. Unfortunately, that day, there was 2 fatalities and 6 serious incidents up on the mountain pass. Milky later found out that if he had turned up to race, he would have been the first 2 or 3 off the starting grid. Now, that's interesting, because it wasn't just Milky. The late Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest Formula 1 drivers of all time, one of his famous stories, depicted in his autobiography, is that during the pre-season trial of a new car, he wasn't happy with the car and pulled into the pits and demanded that the mechanics stripped it down, right to the bare bones, and built it again. You can imagine the mechanics' answer to that. The computer tests, everything they were doing, the diagnostics was correct. And they said, Ayrton, everything's fine. He stood fast and said, I don't care. It doesn't feel right. Strip it down. And they stripped it down. And one of the minute parts, a component in that car, had a hairline fracture. And it was a vital component. That very soon after, with the vehicle being tested to its limits, that vehicle could have exploded. Ayrton Senna also was famous for declaring that he drove unconscious. And it's probably something we can relate to. If you've ever done a long drive along a motorway, sometimes a mile or 2 passes by and you can't remember it. It gets a little bit scary. You've all experienced that? Yeah. Well, this is what happened. So a professor from Hungary, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, describes this as flow. Now, what is flow? For me, I looked at these guys doing the Isle of Man TT race, and I asked, what's their motivation? Why are they doing this? Maybe it's for a higher level of performance. Maybe they want to be in complete control of themselves, the vehicle, and the track to get round. They have the perfection. So maybe that's flow. Ayrton Senna, when qualifying for the Monte Carlo Grand Prix in 1988, pulled into the pits yet again after completing 3 qualifying laps. The first 2 laps, he said he drove completely out of his awareness. He wasn't thinking of anything, or so he thought. He was scared when he arrived back in consciousness. He didn't want to drive, and he refused to drive. Ironically, it was the best drive of the day, and he qualified in pole position. So did I turn left or right? If I turned left, I could have gone to my kit, got my bag, got into my car, and drove home to the support of my family. But something told me to turn right. And by turning right, I went deeper into the building. I went to the change rooms of the senior professionals and the offices of the coaches, and I shook their hands and I thanked them for all their help and assistance over the years. I even went out into the stadium itself and took a walk around the pitch, reminiscent of all the good times I had there and my enjoyment. I even spotted the seat that I sat at as a child, cheering on my heroes. Things had changed, and I now had to make more decisions. So what's this all about? Current research suggests that gut feelings, on average, can be up to 80% correct. That's not bad odds to me. So what do we need to do going into the future? Well, maybe if we took a little bit more time to understand our decision-making process rather than dealing with the consequences, by then taking those learnings forward into the now, we can all travel forwards in a more positive light, not just to make a better future for ourselves, but for everybody else around us. And therefore, we'll be minimizing our chances of deciding to fail. Thank you very much.